Hello, everyone. I'm about to give you a short presentation to go along with the notes I provided you on Chapter 13. I noticed that I forgot to change it in the top where it says this chapter provides more information, blah, blah, blah. But this is Chapter 13 of your open stack. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into the notes. All right, the first section gives you some objectives. We're going to be looking at the major regions of the adult brain and look into major lobes, fissures, functional areas of the cerebral cortex. For section 1, we have the adult brain regions. There are 4 blanks provided for you. The items are on your screen that I need you to put into those blanks. We have your cerebral hemispheres. Collectively, it's also referred to as the cerebrum, so that 2 sections at the top of your brain. You have your diencephalon, the brain stem, which is the midbrain, pons, and medulla, and then your cerebellum, which is the lower portion of the brain. They're actually separated by a fissure. All right, so here is your one of your cerebral hemispheres. Your diencephalon is located in here. That's where you'll find your hypothalamus and your thalamus. The brainstem is this portion here, which is composed of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And the cerebellum is this portion here. All right, in regions of organization of the CNS, for A, please write the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the central cavity surrounded by gray matter. The external portion is going to be composed of white matter, and it's myelinated fiber tracts that are located there. For B, in the blank, please write brain. The brain's composition or organization is similar to that of the pattern of the spinal cord. There are some additional areas that are composed of gray matter than what's located in the spinal cord. The cerebral hemisphere and the cerebellum have an outer gray matter called the cortex, and the cortex actually starts to disappear as you enter into the brainstem. All right, next are our surface markings. I'm going to give you a brief description of each that's located on the very first bullet, where it has ridges, gyri, shallow grooves, which are the sulci, and deep grooves. All right, so for your number 1, please write the elevated ridges of tissue located in the brain are the gyri being plural. The elevated ridges of tissue located in the brain are the gyri. So those bumps that you see on the brain, those would be your gyri. If you were to refer to it singularly, it would be a gyri. For the second space provided, the shallow grooves are the sulci being plural. The shallow grooves are the sulci. If we were to say it singularly, it will be sulcus. The sulcus actually covers the entire surface of the cerebral hemisphere. So you'll see little tiny grooves that kind of separate each one of those gyri or those bumps. For your third space, the deep grooves, the ones that are much, much deeper, that actually provide some type of separation, those are going to be your fissures. Fissures actually separate the hemispheres of the cerebral portion of the brain. And then the gyri and the sulci are actually going to be important landmarks in the brain. They are more prominent than the fissures are. Oh. All right, moving down to B, where it says longitudinal fissure. Your longitudinal fissure separates the 2 hemispheres. And then your transverse fissure actually separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. So let me go to this diagram. Okay, so here is your left hemisphere of the cerebral portion of the brain. This is your transverse fissure, which is this portion here. Transverse fissure is actually what separates the cerebral from the cerebellum. All right, and then the longitudinal fissure, I can find a diagram of that. Here, longitudinal fissure is this long, deep fissure that actually separates your brain into hemispheres. So you have your left cerebral hemisphere here and your right cerebral hemisphere here. All right, so let's go back to our 5 lobes. All right, so in the space provided by D where it says 5 lobes, please write several of the sulci. Divide each hemisphere into 5 lobes. Several of the sulci. Divide each hemisphere into 5 lobes. Also note that all of the lobes are named for the bone that they overlie except the last. All of the lobes are named for the bones that they overlie except the last, which is the insula. So your 5 lobes are frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, and insula. If you go down to E, where it says central sulcus, the central sulcus lies in the frontal plane and separates the frontal and parietal lobes. So in this diagram, you have your central sulcus, which is the division portion here. Remember, the sulcus is going to be not a very deep groove located within the brain. And this is your frontal lobe, and this lighter blue is your parietal lobe. All right. The parietal occipital, it separates the occipital and the parietal lobes. So here's our parietal occipital. This line represents that sulcus. And here we have our parietal lobe, and then this is our occipital lobe. All right, if you look at page 3, at the top where it says lateral sulcus, so your lateral sulcus is actually going to be an outline of the temporal lobe, and it separates it from the parietal and the frontal lobes. So here we have our lateral sulcus, which is located here around this dark portion, and it separates the parietal lobe from the temporal lobe, which is this darker portion of blue. And then finally, we have our insula. So located in this portion here is your insula. It is buried deep within the lateral sulcus. So remember in the previous one, here we said that our lateral sulcus was this portion. So if you separated those two out, you would be able to see that the insula is located there. It actually forms part of the floor of the brain here. It's also covered by a small portion of the temporal, parietal, and frontal lobes. All right. Okay. Next, it's asking for us to look at the 3 basic regions of the cerebral hemisphere. So we are at I, right underneath where H, the insula, is located. The 3 basic regions are the cerebral cortex, the white matter, and the basal nuclei. So the cerebral cortex is composed primarily of gray matter, but it's going to be more superficial, whereas the white matter is going to be deeper or more internally. The basal nuclei is going to also be located deep within the white matter that is present. There are 3 types of functional areas that we're going to look at from the brain. These functional areas are located within the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex makes up about 40% of the brain, and it's the location of our conscious mind. So where we're aware of what's around us, things that are going on within our body, our sensory perception, our voluntary motor ignition, or deciding to move our muscles, our ability to communicate. It's where we also have our memory stored and where we are able to process an understanding of stuff. So the 3 functional areas that we're looking at are motor areas, sensory areas, and association areas. So in your first blank where it's A, the description has been provided for you. I just need you to please write the motor area. The motor area is located in the interior areas of the brain. It controls voluntary movement. It lies in the posterior part of the frontal lobe. So it's going to be more toward the back of the frontal lobe. The sensory areas are going to be located in the posterior areas of the brain. It's going to, well, let me say, the motor areas is pretty much what controls voluntary movement. within the body. The sensory areas is going to be more concerned with your conscious awareness of sensation. It's the area of the cortex within the parietal, the insular, temporal, and occipital lobes. So it's what allows us to be aware of the sensations of our body. Association area is actually divided into three parts. We have an anterior, a posterior, and a limbic. We will not look into those in more detail, but just know that there are three parts of the association area. Collectively, they are all involved with intellect, cognition, our ability to recall. It's what develops our personalities, reasoning, understanding, the ability to provide spoken language, and our memory. All right, and the other thing I wanted to make sure that you paid attention to is that each hemisphere is concerned with contralateral side of the body. When I say contralateral, what I'm referring to is that your right brain is actually what's controlling the left side of your body, and your left brain is what's controlling the right side of your body. So that's what we're referring to when we say contralateral. And then these two additional points, the lateralization of the cortical function in the hemispheres, our conscious behavior also involves the entire cortex in some way. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add. If you'll go back to, let's put this. Okay, where you have the three types of functional areas. Out beside that, please write the executive suit. The executive suit is referred to as the cerebrum. This is the location of our conscious mind. It's what's enabling us to be aware of ourselves, our sensations, our ability to remember things, understand or process an understanding, and initiate our voluntary movements. So the cerebrum is referred to as our executive suit. It accounts for about 40% of the mass of the brain. All right, so now we're at the bottom of page 3. All right, at the bottom of page 3, it has the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. So we're going to briefly look at one of the three that we previously discussed, which is our motor area. You should read more about sensory and association for your final on your own. But just for the test that we have coming up, this is what I needed you to know. So for number 1, where we have our primary somatic or our primary motor cortex, it's going to be located in the precentral gyrus as far as its location. This portion in the frontal lobe is what's associated with the control of our voluntary movement. The premotor cortex is located it's actually anterior to the precentral gyrus. Broca's area is anterior to the inferior premotor area, and the frontal eye field is located within the interior portion of the premotor cortex. It's right above or superior to Broca's area. So this portion is just about their location. Specifically, for the premotor cortex, it has large neurons that are called the pyramidal cells. It allows for the conscious control of precise, skilled skeletal movements. The premotor cortex allows for conscious control of precise, skilled skeletal movements. All right, so your premotor cortex, which we just briefly went over, is what's going to help us plan movements. So in the staging area for skilled motor activity, such as playing a musical instrument, performing dances in a musical, and typing. That's going to also come from your premotor cortex. It also aids us in controlled learning. So when we have to do something repetitiously in order to remember that, that's also associated with your premotor cortex. It coordinates a stimulus or a sequential action. So voluntary action depends on our sensory feedback. From this portion of the premotor cortex, we're able to controls something that's learned, repetition, or a pattern motor skill. Broca's area is what allows us to speak or the production of speech. It directs the muscles of the mouth, allows you to answer questions. Broca's area is actually only located in one hemisphere. For most of us, it's usually the left hemisphere where you will find Broca's area. And then finally, with our frontal field eye movement area, it's what controls the voluntary movement of our eye. Part of it is located in the anterior premotor cortex, just above Broca's area. Okay. All right, so the brief statements that I provided to you, you can fill those in on page 4. You may want to go back and replay that portion of the video. All right, and then for page 5, there are 5 questions that I would like you to take an opportunity to try to attempt to answer on your own. I'm going to pause for a moment. So if you wanted to, pause the video, you will be able to try to answer these questions. And then after the pause, you'll be able to get the answers. All right, for question 1, the brainstem consists of, the correct answer is B, the midbrain, the medulla and pons. Question 2, which of the following best describes the cerebrum? The correct answer is C, the executive suit. Question 3, Broca's area. The correct answer is D, is considered a motor speech area. This is the area where it allows us to form a response to a question or to speak. Number 4, which fissure separates the cerebral hemisphere? Is B, longitudinal fissure. Number 5, the shallow groove on the surface of the cortex is called a blank. The correct answer is A, sulcus. And number 6, loss of the ability to perform skilled motor activities such as playing a piano with no paralysis or weakness in specific muscles might suggest damage to blank. The correct answer is B, the premotor cortex. All right, I do appreciate your patience in the fact that I'm not able to hold a lecture physically for you on May 1st or our next class meeting. Please bring any notes that you have questions about to class. That way, if there was some information you weren't able to locate or wanted more clarification on, I can assist you with that. All right, have a great evening.